Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Advance Your Advocacy Practice. My name is Melissa Hayo, and I'm the manager of the Disability Advocacy Resource Unit, and it's a pleasure to be your host at this session today. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting today on the unceded land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respect to their elders past and present. I would also like to pay my respect to all other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on this call today. Today's session is about advancing your practice as advocates. So please make sure that you add to your learning by asking questions in the Q&A box, and I will put them to our panel. If we run out of time, our panelists will follow up with answers after the session concludes. The session will be recorded and available on the Dalu website for your reference, along with any other resources that are mentioned today. In February 2023, a new Charter of Rights for Parents and Carers with Disabilities involved with the child protection in Victoria was released via the Funding Court Human Rights Advisory Committee, which is a department within the Supreme Court of Victoria. The Charter aims to improve outcomes for parents and carers with disabilities who come into contact with child protection in Victoria. It recognises that parents and carers have a right to a relationship with their children. It also recognises that child protection has a legal responsibility to promote the child's best interest and safety, and throughout their involvement with the child, should engage with the parents and carers in an open and transparent way. This session aims to delve more into the detail of what the Charter means on the ground for parents and carers with disabilities, and what impact this will have for disability advocates working with clients in child protection spaces. To explore more, we have a panel here today. So the panelists we have here today are Miranda Bain, Director of Strategy, Government and Community Relations at Funding Court, and also the Deputy Chair of the Human Rights Advisory Committee at Funding Court, who took courage of this project. Susan Arthur, a self-advocate from Positive Powerful Parents, self-advocacy group supporting parents with intellectual disability who have interacted with child protection system. Bradrick Jensen, an advocacy manager from Ballard, and Denise Boyd, the Executive Officer from Star Victoria. So welcome everybody, and thank you for your time today. But first I would like to throw to Miranda. So Miranda, can you tell us a bit about the Charter and how it came to be and what it hopes to achieve?
First, thank you for inviting me here. This is a wonderful opportunity to talk about the Charter and also the work of the Human Rights Advisory Committee. So I thought I would just give a brief historical summary of how we came to be here. And that means that, I'm just running two computers. So the Human Rights Advisory Committee is made up of many organisations. So it's a multi-jurisdictional approach to solving issues around access to justice. It began in 2016 with support of the former Chief Justice, Marilyn Warren AC. And in the course of that work, we were introduced through another initiative of the committee to Susan Arthur, who told us her story, and in particular her involvement with child protection. And Susan Arthur will talk, she is with us today, and she can talk to that. So from a human rights perspective, what we were interested in knowing originally was why was there an overrepresentation of people with a disability, in particular with an intellectual disability, in the court system and more broadly in other jurisdictions. So in late 2016, we set up a working group, which is the model that we follow, and we included from that day child protection, and we had psychologists, neuropsychs, and other people involved one way or another with people with a disability in justice. And that working group wanted to examine some of the underlying assumptions around someone who has a disability and how that disability is perceived, and whether or not those underlying assumptions were correct. So historically, we found that the authorities believed that people with a disability, in particular with an intellectual disability, had parenting inadequacies, which were then, so that when they came before them, in particular in a court, and this has been the subject of national and international research, they thought the baby would do better. You remove their biological mum and dad and be placed in out-of-home care. So when we sort of drill down a little bit more, we realised that the assumption behind that belief was that parents who had a disability, in particular an intellectual disability, including learning difficulties, other difficulties, that they couldn't be shown or educated on how to adequately raise their baby. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I wanted to let you know that the first studies around these sorts of issues began in the early 1980s and continue today. And that the research basically was from an observational point of view. So when I go into the home, what do I see? I take notes. There seems to be some gaps. And so from those gaps, the authorities then would assume that the environment wasn't the right environment in which to raise a baby. Later research, around 2000 to 2014, showed that the prevalent view remained that teaching parents with disabilities, in particular with an intellectual disability, required very expensive behavioural interventions. So you can see how it becomes an issue of cost, not whether or not it was a true statement. We then went overseas and we had a look at Maurice Feldman's step-by-step guide. So this is, 2016 to today. And the Department of Human Services invited Maurice to come over and he talked about his step-by-step guide. And we went to the department and asked them to fund a pilot using that program. And that we went in and out of the department, I think, for about 3 years. And that funding request, even though it got very close at times, was not successful. So then we were introduced to Tweddle, the baby sleep hospital, it's commonly known as, and we had a look at their HOPES program. Now, the HOPES program has recently been funded by the department to work with mums and dads with an intellectual disability to raise their babies. And the key to that is family preservation, new teaching skills, and not losing the baby to out-of-home care. So you can see that. So I think that you can see that the history of how we came to want to have a charter was that even if we targeted some parents and we had some funding and we were able to change the course of the involvement of the child protection with particular families, it would always be not enough. We would never be able to do enough. So we went back to the department in 2020 and began to talk with them through COVID about a charter and what that would look like. That working group, again, was made up of human rights lawyers, child protection, the Department of Fairness, Family and Housing, Child Protection, and other members, another psychologist. And we began to work on some of the principles that we would like to have in a charter. So you've heard a little bit about the Charter and why it's here. So I want to get the purpose of the Charter is to improve outcomes for parents and carers with disabilities who have an involvement with child protection. And it does recognise the right of parents and carers to have a relationship with the child. So the emphasis is on child family preservation, not separation, key critical bit. And it does recognise that there's a kind of a tension there, because the department does have a legal responsibility to protect the child and to assure that the child's best interests and safety are paramount. And yet the rights of the parent in that overarching responsibility, it was agreed, had not really been promoted. But there still remains a tension. So the rights in the Charter are consistent with the Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities Act 2006, the Equal Opportunity Act 2010, the Children, Youth and Families Act 2005. So one of the key things in developing this Charter was to make sure that the legal implications of the Charter for both parties, mums and dads, the department, was that was very carefully looked at, because the Charter doesn't set out legal obligations. It just sets out a charter of expectations around human rights, and we needed to make that compatible. So the principles that we decided on was, you have the right, a mum and dad with a disability have the right to participate, to be heard, and to be included. They have the absolute right to be respected. They have the right to information in accessible formats. They have a right to have support, which is the role we think of the advocate, and they have the right to be treated fairly. And each one of those rights we drill down, and that was translated into what does that mean for a mum and dad involved with child protection. Now, we also produced this charter in an easy access format. That was work that was done by the Council for Intellectual Disabilities in New South Wales, and that is also available to download. So there are obligations. The Child Protection will provide a copy of the Charter. Child protection workers are undergoing training currently. They must provide a copy of the Charter in their first contact with a mum or a dad. Child protection practitioners must discuss the Charter, the statements in it, and what the parent and mum and dad can expect from their interaction with child protection. The copy will be provided in the first initial meeting. It will be in a digital format, because most of child protection workers have a laptop that they take with them, and they must provide the name and contact details of the child protection worker and their manager. So what do we need, I think, now? We need advocates to empower, which is what you do already. But we're asking you to empower your clients, and by seeking out this charter and making sure that it is read, used, access by all the parties in the room, and that if you feel that it isn't, that there is a conversation and discussion happening which isn't respectful, that doesn't recognise the rights of the mum and the dad, that they're not fully informed, that decisions are being made too quickly, and that there is an imbalance, because change is hard, and people's workloads are massive, and we don't want any shortcuts. So we're asking you to really, really, really make sure that the Charter is accessed, used in every conceivable way in the conversations that go on between a mum and a dad with a disability and with child protection. These are very early days. We launched it in February. The training, my understanding is, it's just begun. We're having a look at the Charter around its implementation and what are the obstacles and barriers for a person with a disability to asking for it. All of you in the room, you will have 1,000 stories of someone who has a disability who has an involvement with child protection, and how that is so anxious provoking, that you may not, a mum and a dad may not want to ask about the Charter, because it's already fraught. This is a very stressful environment for them, for everyone, but it will make it better. It's a way of guiding a conversation and making it fair and equitable. And that's the purpose of a Charter, is to set out a new way of having a conversation which is respectful. And if you come across any issues with this, don't hesitate to email me or give me a call. We're here to hear what the obstacles are and the barriers are, and we will also ask you to contact the department and talk with them around the obstacles and barriers that you are seeing in your work. I think that's probably enough for me.
Thank you very much, Miranda. Much appreciated. Um, Fantastic. I think I would like to check in with Susan and ask about her perspective as well on the Charter. Hi, Susan. So
Hello.
hi, you're representative of Positive Powerful Parents, and I'm sure the audience would love to know a little bit more about Positive Powerful Parents. What can you tell me about the group?
So, Positive Powerful Parents is run for and by parents with an intellectual disability who have had involvement with the child protection system. So we make sure that parents get their rights, and yes, that we're also, you can find us on the internet at www.positivepowerfulparents.com.au.
Fantastic. So I will make sure that that website is on the resources later so people can have a look at that website as well. So what do
That'll be
you think?
great.
Yeah. So what do you think about the Charter?
So we think that the parents' voice still needs to be in there. We think the pages need to be formatted differently. It would be nice if the state government's logo was on it to show that they have endorsed it. Acknowledgement of country should be in there. We at every meeting there's acknowledgement of country. Um, the explanations should be clearer, and some of what's written in the charter is great, and it's exciting to see some good stuff in writing.
Yeah. So it needs to be clear for parents to be able to understand what's in it so that they're able to use it in their interactions with child protection. Absolutely, really important. What are you hoping that having the charter will be able to do for parents who have interactions with the child protection system?
Yeah, so positive, powerful parents were really lucky recently to meet with someone with child protection, and we know that they haven't will use it, so that's a positive thing. And as Miranda said, they're being trained on it as we speak. Um, if parents get a copy and understand it would be great. But positive, powerful parents also think that parents shouldn't get the copy from the child protection worker in that first visit because they're not likely to take any of it in what the child protection worker explains to them because they're already, as Miranda sort of suggested before, very stressed and upset. So, positive, powerful parents is actually suggesting that advocates should um, give them the charter and explain to them what their rights are so that they don't have to feel like they are having that conversation straight away with child protection. And I would, as a parent, would be worried that the parent may sort of back off a bit or something after that. So we believe that. And how parents get, yeah, so as I said, and how parents get it, that's what I was just talking about. Parents could understand their rights so they can be it's good that parents could understand their rights so they can be strong advocates for themselves and maybe not need advocacy in the future. Um, Parents and advocates can use the rights while being involved with child protection.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the goal. Hopefully, one day we won't need advocates at all because everyone has the same rights as everybody else. And one thing I would like to say to you and to all the other self advocates involved with positive, powerful parents is thank you for your advocacy because it is because of people like you that we have this charter in the first place. It is a great first step to be able to recognize the rights of parents and carers with disabilities and their rights in the child protection spaces. So best of luck, and we're all behind you, and hopefully this changes things for a lot of people. Well done. So the next people I would like to talk to now is Frederick and Denise about your perspective as disability advocates working alongside people with disabilities in the child protection spaces. So having now heard about the charter and having heard from positive, powerful parents as well. So what do you see as the benefits of having this charter in the child protection manual for your work as disability advocate? So perhaps we start with you, Frederick.
Yeah, look, it's a step in the right direction, I would say, to have the charter in the manual. But on its own, it's not going to do much difference. And I think we need to remember all the structural issues, and look at this holistically as well, because obviously we work in this space, and what we see is that parents with intellectual disability are, they've often been in the system themselves, so they have felt the structural violence that sometimes comes from systems like child protection, unfair treatment. They also live on in poverty quite often, and the charter is not going to change the fact that a mother with an intellectual disability cannot afford to get to access, because she might live in a regional town, and NDIS is not necessarily going to fund her getting access with her child when she has to travel into a major city to get that access. So there are lots of issues here, and from we certainly welcome that there is a charter now that sort of sits alongside or on top of the Human Rights Charter and the Equal Opportunity Act, which is what we frequently will pull out when we see injustices happening in this space, and this is more specific around child protection. So I think that's helpful to have that. I think we yet have to see, how it will work in praxis. And I also think it really interesting, that Susan just said before. She highlighted the power imbalance. When you sit as a parent with child protection, and that you will feel stressed out and upset, and you may not want to have that discussion. So it's a good thing they give the charter out. Some of the parents we work with, they can't read. So I certainly would say it might be a good thing to put it on a website and actually, make a bit of a video about it and an audio file. So lots more resources that are accessible. The other thing I think that really needs to be thought about going forward, and this goes for all the areas that we work in as advocates, it's not mandated that parents with intellectual disability, when they're involved with child protection, gets an advocate. So there's no guarantee. With the advocacy that's funded in that space in Victoria, it's a small group of parents who get that support. And I also think grassroots organizations like Positive Powerful Parents, like they are extremely important in this space. And as I said, we certainly will use the charter, and we will be holding everyone accountable in this space, as we've always done. But yeah, I think it's important to monitor, and then it's a good opportunity to have the discussion down the track and highlight the structural issues that I've just mentioned and the problems in that.
Great, thank you for that. Denise, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, thanks very much for that. And I agree with much of what Frederica has said. I would note that the Charter is actually for parents and carers with disability. It's not specifically intellectual disability. And because PPP are here today, as are Valid and STAR, we really are focusing on parents with intellectual disability, and that's our area of specialty. I would note that probably with the chart is a good step forward, but it does need, in my view, a legislative backing, because at the moment it's included in the Child Protection Manual. It's been rolled out. The training, we know, hasn't been rolled out across the board, so the child protection workers don't necessarily yet know, whenever they come into contact with a parent with disability, that they need to use that, although I'm optimistic that will be changing this year as the training rolls out. But I would agree that every parent, whether particularly parents with an intellectual disability, need to be assigned an advocate immediately, not just happily stumble over one because somebody happened to mention it to them. They need to be assigned one right from the start, because that really is the only way to make sure that their rights and wishes are understood and heard. We know that parents who do have an advocate fare a lot better and get a much better hearing than parents who don't have an advocate. So in the same way that every parent that goes through the Children's Court is assigned a lawyer through legal aid, we do think that they should be assigned a professional disability advocate to help them in their discussions and negotiations with the department. I would say, though, that with this legislative trigger, the Charter should be a complement to that. In the legislation at the moment, there is a trigger if a child is Aboriginal, and that requires certain things to be done. But there's no trigger in the legislation yet for parents with disabilities, and particularly intellectual disabilities, and that's a deficiency in the Act. We do have obligations in Victoria and Australia generally under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disability. So under Article 23, which is respect for home and the family, there is a right for all persons with disabilities to marry and to found a family. And it also says that in no case should a child be separated from their parents on the basis of disability, either of the child or on one or both of the parents. And yet, when we look at the documents that are tabled in the Children's Court, usually, certainly for the people that STAR's working with, intellectual disability features pretty high up the list of protective concerns, and that's what Miranda was talking about earlier. This idea that parents with intellectual disability are not capable of learning new things and can't be trusted to parent their children safely. We know that that's wrong. It's outmoded thinking, but there is a lot of conscious and unconscious bias that exists in the system, and that needs to be tackled. The Charter is one way forward with that, but we do need to get something. We actually do need the law to back up what the child protection workers are required to do when it is identified that a parent has an intellectual disability. No parent should have to play the postcode lottery about whether or not they're able to get assistance or not. And unfortunately, that's what we see right now. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Can I see everybody else on the screen, please? Great. So I've got one question I want to put to all of you. So with the Charter in action now, what does a great outcome look like? So I might go to Susan first. So now that we have this Charter, what do you hope that a good outcome looks like? What is the ideal outcome? I think we're on mute.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I think the ideal outcome for parents would be, as we just said, as a lot of people have said, that parents get to keep their children with the support they need, and get an advocate early on, and that should be mandated as soon as the parent, even the doctors should know about it. So when the parent goes to the doctor to get a test and they find out they're pregnant, that should be when an advocate is put in place, because we got that UN Charter, as Denise suggested, but it's very rarely actioned on, and actually the opposite happens. Our children are taken, and usually with no little um, action taken to see what support we could have to see if we can look after our children, which the majority of the time a parent with intellectual disability can parent their child with the support they need.
Fantastic answer, Susan. So what about the rest of you? What does a great outcome look like? Miranda.
An ideal outcome is that any parent with a disability, I want to say something a little bit before that. The Charter is being used by Child Protection for anyone that comes into their system, because they realise that someone with a disability may not disclose it, they may not be able to pick up that someone has a disability, so therefore the Charter of Rights would be available to anyone that has any involvement with child protection. I'll just go back to another point that Susan made. The department decided that they wouldn't put their logo on it, not because they weren't endorsing it, but they thought that there are so many negative perceptions of the role of the department. They thought a logo would be a disincentive for the charter being picked up by anyone who needed it. So when you think about human rights and family preservation, ideally, the best outcome would be that any person, parent or carer with a disability, is given every single opportunity with support to raise their baby or toddler in their own home. The support really should be in the home. We understand if you have an intellectual disability because of a thing called contextual learning. That is that a mum or a dad with an intellectual disability learns better when they are being shown what to do in the context of their home. And it's also where systems of support can be more ideally recognised and pulled in. So systems of support means family support, family or friend support, and professional, I guess, like the HOPES program, that those supports are pulled into the home where they matter most. The thing that Denise said is, I think, completely correct, and that is that the charter begins. So I think from memory, the Victims of Crime Charter began, and that then became a standard document, a point of referral, and it became a working document, and it was then enshrined in legislation. We're not there yet, but ideally, legislation would be looked at and legislation should be changed, because legislation that's built on an outmoded, inaccurate, unfair, biased perception of someone's capacity to parent shouldn't be enshrined in legislation. It must be changed. And that, I think, is something that we all should be looking at.
Thank you for that, Miranda. Denise, what does a great outcome look like for you?
Thanks for that. Well, a great outcome for me is that the Charter is able to contribute to the conversation that we're having in Victoria about the rights and interests of parents with disability, and in particular parents with intellectual disability. We expect that there will be an opportunity to make changes to the legislation in the next couple of years, and that the government we want the government to be open to questioning its own legislation and the biases that we know that exist, and take steps to remedy them. And if the Charter is one of those trigger points, if you like, for having that conversation, then it will already have done its job, and that would be a great thing.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you for that. And last but not least, Frederick, what would your great outcome look like for you?
Look, in addition to what others have said, I agree with what they are saying in terms of outcomes, but I also think it would be really prudent to look at the practicality of improving things for parents. So, as others have said, funding for advocacy, but also to look at things more holistically when a parent comes in to or involved with child protection. So NDIS certainly needs to be looked at, because that's where some of the support does come from today. And we do see a few good examples of NDIS support coordinators aware of the parents' rights, and they will sometimes act in advocacy roles as well, and ensure that the parent gets extra funding and support through NDIS. Not all NDIS planners favours this. We see some different outcomes. So in addition to the legal changes, and certainly looking at the cultural changes and the unconscious bias, that's a huge thing. But yeah, look at the practicality of things, because I think Miranda referred to it early on. Child protection workers have got, they've got a huge workload, and it needs to be accounted for that they've got that extra time. And we see this overall where, our clients or the people that we consult with are involved with the justice system, be it child protection or facing criminal charges. There's not enough time for the lawyer to even sit down and speak to the person, because they need to spend the extra time. So yeah, overall, looking at the practicality of all of this and how this can be improved. So I would hope, as Denise also said, that having the charter, we can have more discussions about this, just like what we are having right now.
Thank you, everybody. It sounds like this is definitely an ongoing work in progress, and I'm sure the advocacy sector is all going to band together to make this work for everyone. Such an important piece of work. We're going to go to questions from the audience. They're coming in thick and fast, so we're not going to be able to answer all questions, but we will go to some of them, and then offline I will forward on the other questions, and hopefully we can answer them offline and forward on to the group later. So I'll go to the first question, please. Okay. It'll come up online in a second. So, is the charter to be introduced to existing child protection clients or to new clients as of February? That's quite a technical one. Miranda, would you like to tackle that one first?
My current understanding is that it will be available to new clients. However, existing clients can ask for it and have it introduced into the conversation with their child protection worker. So again, we're very reliant on the role of the advocate or the support person in the room to make sure that the charter is being used.
Yeah. Okay, great. Anybody got anything else to add to that? No? Okay, great.
Yeah.
So we'll go to, Denise.
Yeah, it does depend on the parent knowing that the charter exists.
Yeah.
So there needs to be a little bit more work done in that regard. You can't use something that you don't know about.
That's right.
Denise.
That's why we need the advocate. Oh, sorry. That's why we're really relying on the role of the support worker or the advocate in these early days to promote it and to make sure that people are accessing it and it's being used properly.
Great. Thank you. Next question. For a matter where the court handed down a permanent care order in, say, 2016, is the charter able to be accessed by parents who are subject to an existing order? Will these parents be notified of the charter by child protection?
Well, I might have to take that on notice. But Denise, I'm happy to hand it the first answer to that.
Yeah. I'll have a go, but my understanding is when it's a permanent care order, then the child is no longer under the care of the department, is under the care of the person to whom the court has assigned care of the child. So I would say my interpretation of that would be no, that there's no need, there would be no obligation to notify the parents. It's not to say that they shouldn't have it, but I would suggest that if there is that order, then the child has been put under a permanent care order, and that's a lot harder. But I could be wrong.
Does anyone else have
Again,
anything
it
to add?
points to that. I just think it points to that, to Denise's earlier point about the role of legislation, because it should be that the Charter does have an impact on these various situations. But for that to happen, we'd have to change the legislation.
Okay. Any next question? What is of most concern often is that people cannot read or understand the documents sent to them and don't have the time to ask for help to understand. Processes by the child protection workers don't allow for this and to slow down. Everything is so precious and ignorant. And that goes back to what Susan was saying before about sometimes some of the things, including the charter wording itself, can sometimes be really difficult to understand. And that was more of a comment than a question. So I suppose I'm going to turn that into a question. What is being done to make sure that some of the processes that are used by child protection are more user-friendly for people with intellectual disability, if anything?
Can I answer this slightly differently in that the the um, the role of the charter should be in an accessible format. I think we're now looking to see if we can get some funding to make it into a YouTube video as well as an audio track, so that once we've tested it, then that means that it's accessible in an accessible formats available on any internet site, so that in before an involvement or when involved with child protection, a parent, a mum and a dad would be able to access the information with an advocate or support person and understand and grow to understand its usefulness. The other part to that question really, I think, centres on Frederica's point, and that is that the systems themselves are very rigid and work against a conversation, um, and that's something that we will be taking up with the department once they've done their training bit, to see how what can change in that environment to make the conversation easier. But there's some systems issues here. We've got workload issues, competing tensions, a very anxious, provoking moments, and so therefore, in a reflective practice world, time would always be made available. You would if this was in any other environment. If you were trying to understand what was happening in a personal way, you would spend time with a psych or a counsellor or a trauma counsellor. There would be time given. There would be an appropriate time given for some reflective practice and a conversation that would occur without the heat of the moment putting pressure on the type of the discussion. Now that's a systems issue, and I think that when you think about equity and access to justice, you would want to have an environment where that level of conversation and the quietness of a place would occur. That's a practice issue. I'm happy to take that up.
Thank you for that. Next question. Would the advocacy come from our mainstream advocacy services, or would those advocates receive training in the Charter? So this is a question about the Charter and whether we will receive training about the Charter. Is anyone able to answer that? Perhaps it is something we need to think about, Denise.
Yeah, I would say that certainly dealing with child protection, that is a specialist issue. So STAR Victoria it does provide individual advocacy to people with intellectual disability, but we have specialised in two key areas, one of which is parents with intellectual disability and child protection, just because it is so technical. It is something for parents with disability generally. I think it is something that is useful for all disability advocacy organisations to be aware of, but it does require training. So it would require, a professional development session run by advocates with experience in the issue, partnered with probably someone like Women's Legal Service, who have lots of experience of working with parents as they're going through the children's court. Because you do need to understand the court processes in order to support parents effectively. It's not just about understanding what the child protection processes are. The court process is quite specific, and then to also understand your role as an advocate, how you can effectively support them, and where you need to basically not just knock politely on doors, but effectively push them open and demand that the parents' rights and interests are taken into consideration throughout the process, because that often does get lost.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Can I add to what Denise said, that apart from understanding the court process, understanding how parents with intellectual disability, like what barriers they face, and the discrimination they face as well. On top of that, I think as advocates, you also really need to understand, the system that is child protection, and how to work with that. It can be really difficult to work in that space. I think it takes quite a lot of knowledge and skill to do that. And sometimes it's an uphill battle because of the nature of the system, because traditionally they look at the child's interest, and they don't look at the situation holistically. So you're sort of up against all of that when you work, in addition to the court processes, and working with the barriers that your clients are facing as well.
Yeah, great, thank you. We've got time for two more questions, so I'll bring up the next one. Denise, I agree access to advocacy for parents with disabilities is critical. I'd be interested in your thoughts on what the impact would be on disability advocacy sector if assigning disability advocates was mandated in the way you've suggested.
Yeah, I was wondering if anybody was going to pick up on that. Well, if it's mandated, then it means that the government has to fund advocacy properly. That's kind of why I said that, because at the moment it really is luck of the draw if people get a disability advocate. They do have a legal entitlement to representation in the court, but they similarly need a disability advocate to help them with some of these really complex issues that come up, and make sure that they understand the processes that child protection will be running and how the court works. The lawyer can only do so much. Okay, so a lawyer is assigned. A lawyer will meet with the person just before going into court. It will often be quite rushed. Not all lawyers are rushed, but they're very time pressured. And they do need someone who can be available to them afterwards to help them think through what was said and make sure that they've understood what's happening, and that they have communicated their wishes to their lawyer effectively. It does mean that you're not doing short-term advocacy. It is time limited. We say to people, once your child protection matters are finished, that we're no longer we'll close our case with you. But it does mean that you need someone who's got a longer term view of the matter. Not from a case management perspective. We do remind everybody we're not case managers, we're not support workers, but we are disability advocates, and we will go through the process with someone as far as we can all the way through. And that can be quite a long-term commitment. And that sort of thing does actually need funding. It's really not funded effectively or properly at the moment. And that's probably because the department really doesn't have a lot of data on the number of parents that are actually affected. So a good place to start is to say to parents, yes, you are entitled to a disability advocate support person when you have child protection involvement. And then that the government makes the funding available for organisations like STAR, like Valid and others to provide the advocacy that those parents are going to need.
Thank you, Denise. And the last question, will there be a session such as this surrounding physical disabilities as well? I suppose I would shape this as in the fact that the charter covers mostly intellectual disabilities, and I suppose you could frame it as in physical disabilities, wouldn't you?
The charter is for anyone who has a disability,
Yeah.
intellectual or physical, learning disabilities, whatever the disability is. So it's not exclusive to just child protection. But I mean, I'm happy to have another conversation at any stage.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, everybody. That's all we have time for today. There are several other questions that we will take note of and send to you offline. If you could kindly answer them offline, then we can put them with our resource page with this recording as well. But we've come to a close for our advanced advocacy practice session today. So I would like to thank Miranda, Susan, Frederick, and Denise for their time and contribution to bring this session to all of us today. It's such a critical topic, and it's very clear from the conversations we're having that the work doesn't stop here, and it's all about, banding together as a sector to make this work for parents with disabilities and their children and the child protection system to make great outcomes happen for everybody. So thank you very much. There'll be further work done, so watch this space and stay engaged in future opportunities to have a say to shape this important piece of work. Thank you to the Auslan interpreters and captioners, and also the show division for bringing this production to you today. Have a wonderful week, everybody, and we'll see you next time.